And hey there, it's Tom Jordan. Got a fantastic program for you today on a Monday. We're just going to jump right into it. Two big stories that impact women, and for that matter, children and parental rights. First, this troubling trend with men being allowed to play in women's sports and why this is continuously being allowed, which directly puts women and girls in harm's way. It's becoming kind of popular for some, but very unpopular for others. So some politicians who have actively supported this anti-woman agenda are now not being too open about that voting record that they have supported in times past. So we'll dive into that. For example, a current U.S. Senate candidate and member of Congress right now, Elissa Slotkin, has a troubling voting record in favor of allowing biological men to compete in women's sports. Elissa Slotkin's her repeated votes against protecting women's spaces, sports, and scholarships. It's a broader dismissal when you look at it and you pull back just a little bit what's happening here of public concern and basic fairness in this. We're going to discuss that along with a major legal change that now allows teachers and staff in schools to refer students for abortions without telling their parents. And it completely strips away this long-standing prohibition of doing that. I'm grateful for my guest. Is going to join me in a few seconds, Caitlin Buss with the Detroit News, for writing about this. These school districts already adopting these policies in the state of Michigan, leaving these life-altering decisions in the hands of school personnel, again, without the knowledge of their parents. So Caitlin Buss is assistant editorial page editor at the Detroit News. She's written about both of these issues, and she will join me live here in just a few seconds. Also, this whole voter roll issue, where hundreds of thousands of eligible voters or ineligible voters are sitting there in various states, and the DOJ won't let those states take them off the voter rolls. They say, wait till after the election before you do that. So we're going to look at Virginia today and also how Michigan Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson and Elon Musk are kind of in a tiff right now. And, you know, she misrepresents her voter rolls. She calls it dangerous disinformation to point out the 500,000 ineligible voters she's yet to get rid of. Elon Musk calls her a liar. So what is it, disinformation, or is she lying about this? That's coming up after my discussion with Caitlin Buss here in a moment. Also, just a reminder to chime in, comment, or ask questions in the comments section. I'll get to those in a moment. In fact, if you'd like to ask Caitlin Buss a question, we're going to put those on the screen as well. We'll vet them on the fly, so to speak, and we'll, put Caitlin and myself on the spot, so to speak. So be nice. Also, best way you can help Tom Jordan Live is simply to subscribe and then click on that notification bell. Subscribing is free. It doesn't cost you anything, but it certainly helps us out here at Tom Jordan Live. Okay, first, abortions. The side of the argument that the left doesn't want us to talk about at all. And I've mentioned before how, Michigan is becoming the most radical of the states when it comes to this. They've just repealed now something that's known, a very catchy phrase, is called 388.1766. Okay, what is that? Sounds like a droid in Star Wars or something, but it now allows schools to refer students for abortions without parental involvement at all. And so the move prioritizes like state control over family input. It's educators over parents. And districts in Michigan have already embraced this policy change. And these districts are setting this precedent that could pressure others to follow. Some other ones are now considering doing the same, which normalizes parental exclusion. And this is just another way that they are trying to do that. And this whole policy change is part of this broader agenda, in my view, which is driven by Democrats and these education officials who want more and more control over your kids without you knowing what they're doing, not to mention what they're teaching them in the classroom. So it's radical ideology. It's eroding traditional role of parents in crucial decisions. So there is that. Also want to talk about this. What do you know? There's another radical policy which allows men to compete in girls' sports. We've talked about this at length before, but it's now being kind of discounted, like it's not really happening by, members of Congress who have voted to support this. And, this was obviously dangerous during the Olympics. That kind of became front and center. That Algerian boxer happened to be a man and beat the snot out of a very strong but female boxer, so fierce that the woman forfeited the match after the first punch. There you have, right there, you're watching a biological man lift weights in a women's competition. What do you think is going to happen there? Who supports this? And why do they? Well, a lot of politicians support this, but Elissa Slotkin would be one of them if her voting record is to be accurately portrayed and observed. Slotkin in Michigan voted for what's known as the Equality Act. She opposed the Protection of Women and Girls in Sports Act, which would have kept women's sports female only. Her votes aligned with these fringe policies. Ignoring, by the way, mainstream public opinion. Most people don't support this. Nearly 70% of Americans want athletes to compete based on biological sex. All right, let's go now to Caitlin Buss. She is the assistant editorial page editor at the Detroit News. And I'm very grateful to have you on the program, Caitlin. Thank you so much. And I really enjoy reading your regular columns in the Detroit News. It's nowadays bold and brave to talk about these things. So thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
You got it. So, oh wait. So let's talk about this first. The issue of protecting the protection of women and girls in sports act. It makes to me, and I think too, as you pointed out in your work, sense to the majority of Americans. But she voted against this, which was designed really what to prohibit biological men from competing in women's sports. Why do you think she and others are supporting this kind of policy and this ideology?
Yeah. It's an issue that no matter where I've been throughout the past campaigns or two campaign cycles, it gets people of all political stripes going. And so I think it's really remarkable that these members of Congress did take a vote on these things. I think Republicans kind of set them up to do so successfully. She had to vote against it. She had to go on the record. She also went against the congressional resolution that would have given members of Congress the ability to disapprove these Title IX changes, which are allowing a lot of changes through policy, allowing men to be in the court. And then she also voted for the Equality Act, which kind of includes gender identity as something that can't be discriminated against, and it's a change to the Civil Rights Act. So these are pretty big legislative moves, that are out there on the record. I think this issue is just now coming up in this campaign cycle, so we'll see how much effect it has in the next few weeks.
Yeah, there's all these precedents being sent, and or set, I should say, and you've got different laws that, as you pointed out, redefine the issue of sex, which was originally meant to mean gender, but now means ideology or sexual preference or your own sexual attraction or how you identify in your own head versus what's biologically apparent to the vast majority of Americans or people in general. And I want to get to that point because, we can call it, this is like anecdotal and all these kinds of things. And, the evidence, the data doesn't support what people say on the streets and whatnot. But the vast majority of people I talk to don't support this. And yet there seems to be a very fringe element in our society that is controlling the narrative, whether it's in the news media or it's in these legislative actions, whether it's in the federal or the state level. So if you're observing these various policy decisions being made, but most Americans don't really seem to support these policies, how are these things getting through? Whether we're talking about women's rights in sports and protecting them, or it's abortion in general, the extreme that they're going to and allowing parents to be excluded from these conversations. Most people don't support that. But how does this, do you feel, still get through
Yeah,
these various state legislatures?
it's interesting because on the abortion issue, at least in Michigan in 2022, it was widely discussed. A lot of conversation about what Proposal 3 would do. And then even last year, when Democrats passed the Reproductive Health Act, there was a lot of conversation about the regulations being taken out. So when I came across the fact that this was being now changed in school boards, I I really second guessed myself because I thought certainly this would have come up. The entire legislature has been debating this for 2 years. The entire state has, and so I was really surprised to see it as part of the School Aid Act. Um, we got a lot less scrutiny. That's kind of pro forma. We're just going to pass this. So I think that's how some of these things are getting through. There's just not light on it. There's no discussion about it. Bills are rushed through. Um, Title regulations. There's been quite a bit of conversation about this on the federal level. Um, but we have the inability of Congress to override bureaucratic regulations. Um, so that's another way. So there's really not an effort to, hey, we're going to put the policy in front of parents, we're going to put it in front of students and stakeholders and say, what do we think about this as a community? Let's talk about it. These things are being slipped through. Now, at the local level, on the abortion issue, I think this conversation will take place. It is a school district what they want to do. Um, but when you're hearing the reasoning, well, it's to align with state law, everyone's like, wait, what's the state law we passed that said we wanted this change? That's where you get into, this wasn't very transparent.
Yeah, see, that was one of the things that frustrated me because back in 2022, when they were campaigning on these various constitutional amendments, Proposal 3 and Proposal 2 and even Proposal 1, they were heavily mischaracterized by all of these politicians. And I spoke to the governor of the state. We spoke to various members of Congress. We've state legislatures who are all Democratic, and they would say that all of these things that are happening now in real time were not going to happen. And they labeled all these things as disinformation, which I think lends itself to people having less trust in what these politicians say. And because as we're seeing it happen in real time, we were told in 2022 that none of these things would occur if we amended the state constitution. And then you talk about Title IX now, which changes the definition of, sex to make it to include, gender identity and those types of things. So this whole, going back to Elissa Slotkin, her now approval of all of these radical far left, I think, fringe ideologies and putting them and supporting them being put into law on the federal level, because that's where she, obviously is a member of Congress. What kind of, I guess, two things. First, I want to ask you this, because I think she's pulling back. A lot of them are. Do you think she now is embarrassed or wants to hide the way that she has voted on these issues now? Because she doesn't seem to be campaigning as she's running for Senate on these votes that she made while she's in Congress.
No, I don't think so. She didn't respond directly during the debate when Rogers was able to bring that up, and maybe she didn't have much time to probably. But I think this is an issue Democrats want to stay far away from, which is why it surprises me they took such recent, actions and didn't find a way out of some of those votes, honestly, just for their campaign. But I think with so much rhetoric in the campaign ads and everything, it's hard to get a lot of voters paying attention to an actual record or abortion regulations. So they're probably paying attention more to the ads. And Roger has come out with a couple of ads on this issue. So like I said, we'll just see how much traction it gains. It's something that a lot of people underline, they care about, but they haven't heard about. So we'll see.
I've been told for a long time, in various jobs that I've had in the media, that to stop discussing these issues because people do not care. They don't care about the culture wars. Let's talk about other things that really matter, like the economy and whatever it is, national security. But don't talk about, men going into women's locker rooms, because it's not an issue. It's really not a campaign issue. Do you feel that's the case, or are you noticing that people actually do care about these issues?
I think they do, and I think that Republicans are coming around to the idea that they're worth talking about again. I think there was certainly a sense to just kind of stick to the economy, stick to the issues that will attract independent voters, and there's a lot to that. I think Trump has successfully done that, kind of recreated a coalition that now can focus on some of these culture wars that are really kind of common sense to a lot of people. Like I cited in the piece, 70% of people agree with just having, women in sports. Now that falls apart, go into more of the details of other transgender issues. But I think it's something that, as we're talking about it more, it's also becoming more of an issue. So it's kind of a cycle.
Yeah, well, there's the general issue of fairness, and you mentioned Mike Rogers. He has talked about this a lot because it seems to make common sense. It's not fair for the women you say, Elissa Slotkin, you're trying to protect, and we got these votes on female athletes. So we obviously there is the, at the very best, awkward situation of biological men standing there in female locker rooms. I mean, that's at the very best awkward. At the worst, it's much worse than that. But when you
And it's
talk,
happening, it is happening. It's not rampant, but it is happening.
yeah, I spoke with Riley Gaines, and she said she was standing there with what her name is, Thomas, the biological male. And he's got all his parts standing there in the locker room, the same one that she's sharing as she's competing in swimming in her college. But there's that aspect of it. But there's the other issue too when we speak about fairness. And now suddenly, these biological men who weren't doing all that well when they were competing against other biological men, they end up identifying as female. And then they go into these competitions against biological females. They're biological men, and they're winning, time after time. And it has a real life impact, a real world impact on these college students who would like to have, or high school students who would like to have scholarships. And they're now being thrust aside, are they not, because of what's happening to them?
Yeah, we're seeing, smaller local districts of schools or independent teams standing up when they feel that they're being pushed aside for a biological male on the team. We're also seeing, kind of horrific injuries when these two kinds of individuals interact on an athletic field. So I expect we'll continue to see that, and hopefully there will be some common sense on this policy, and that, in this election will be elected people that will stick to defending women in an area that they finally have rights in. They finally have ability to compete and succeed on their own.
Yeah. All right. I want to talk about this other issue that you wrote about. And I know I used the catchy phrase of 388.1766, but that's the School Aid Act. And that section of it has been repealed by this Democratic legislature, and it affects the relationship between parents and schools. Can you describe the School Aid? I'm sorry, the School Aid Act, what that is, and what this section is that now allows teachers and staff to help their students get abortions without telling their parents.
Yeah, so I believe it was in 2019 where this policy was put in place, and it was, a prohibition on referral or assistance for abortion, is commonly how it's referred to. Uh, so teachers, staff, school board members could not, direct the student to an abortion without obviously, parental consent or if at all. Um, with this Democrat control and seeing Democratic control of the legislature, they recreated the School Funding Act to, strip this provision so that school districts couldn't be held responsible for it anymore. Teachers couldn't be disciplined breaking the policy. And it's part of kind of, these accountability measures that have been stripped away in general on education over the past year. Uh, so now the schools are free to determine what they do on their own. They don't have to have the policy in. And what we've heard from, them saying, well, we just need to align it with the School Aid Act now. So there doesn't seem to be, a lot of room for conversation on ending that law, on putting the policy back in place. But now we'll see at the local districts what each community wants to do. I think as parents become more aware that this is, potentially being removed, they'll pay attention.
Yeah, that's why we're talking about it, because I don't think parents are aware of this, because it does get hidden by it. And I don't know any parent that says yet I don't want any involvement in major decisions like this, but there are already, my understanding is, based on what you've written, that there are already school districts who are implementing these policies, and there are others in the state of Michigan who are considering this, correct?
Yes, it has passed in at least, 2 to 3 districts right now, at least in my local area. I don't know throughout the state, but what I've heard from legal experts who advise on this is we expect, policies will end up being in line with the state law. So it's just a matter of time, I think, depending on each community. I believe I don't even know if I'm saying right, Caledonia, voted to keep it. And so I don't know much about the details there, but that's an example of someone, trying to keep it.
Yeah, I think it is Caledonia, by the way. Yeah,
Okay,
I don't
great.
I don't visit often, but I'm pretty sure that's how it's spelled. So what they're basically doing, if like I know Rochester, Grosse Pointe, they're removing the disciplinary language for staff involved in these abortion referrals. So they used to be disciplined, at least on paper, when they would do this. I know that they were doing this. Some of them were doing it anyway, kind of sneakily getting that in there. But
Yeah,
that has been done. Yeah, go ahead.
they would lose state funding, and that's how it was tied to the Funding Act. So if someone violated that, the whole district could lose, $100,000, $200,000. So now
Are you
that's not.
aware? Is this at all tied, Caitlin, with Proposal 3? Like, does this give now the state more authority, or is this something totally irrelevant, more tied maybe to the Elliott Larson's Civil Rights Act or whatever that was?
Some of these policies and Title IX in particular, are aligned more with the changes under Elliott Larson. Proposal 3 is really so wide, sweeping that it kind of trumps everything. We still have parental consent on the books, but Democrats, are targeting to get that off the books. We don't have a 24-hour waiting period anymore. So, arguably a child could leave school and go get an abortion and then come up against, I need my parents' permission. Um, but this is about school personnel, teachers are interacting with students and whether or not they're able to be the first person to advise that, female student about what to do in that case. Um, so
The
there's multiple angles of how that
yeah.
would play out, but
Yeah, for sure. So I also am concerned by the number of, you can call them vendors or these consultants or these firms that the state is partnering with to help implement these various policies, or at least they're getting the advice from them. There's one called Miller Johnson. This is a firm specializing in LGBTQ student guidance.
Mhm.
Why are they relevant to this particular issue?
So, I'm not sure what each district, what relationship they have with legal counsel. In Metro Detroit, there's, been some contentious issues. I know that they're up counsel for Rochester. They have some involvement with Grosse Pointe. I'm not sure if it's on policy or not, but they've advised them in other areas. They've come up with Birmingham discussions, and they advise other districts throughout the state. They're a global firm. Um, I think it's each district, if they need additional legal counsel, kind of call that that support for themselves. So it is still school board led. Um, Still have this, advice coming from legal counsel that says, again, think that according to school state law, this is what we see coming down the pike. And so when you hear that, and board members take that into consideration, it is what it is. It's their legal advice, but I don't see account legal advice.
We hear a lot about, this kind of ruse, I think it is, and these policies are made under the guise of protecting students' mental and emotional health, and that's why we have to keep this away from parents, which seems to be oxymoronic to me. That the whole role, one of the roles of the parents, is to protect their kids from mental and psychological harm. But the students, and this is like an issue, I think, the way it was described is, student rights versus parent rights. And we're all about student rights as if somehow their parents are always harmful to them. So we can't tell their parents. But is there any data to support the fact that if the teachers and the staff end up taking control of these young kids in doing this, that actually protects them from psychological harm by separating them from, parental authority?
I'm not an expert on the psychology here. I know, what I've lived through. I know I'm a parent myself. Um, I certainly want that first, right to my child's mental well-being, physical well-being, all these common things that are written into Michigan state law, written into the school code, that parents have the right to educate, direct the education of their children. So I think it's concerning that there are attempts, by the teachers' unions to kind of put these wedges in between parents, limit transparency. Um, Teacher documents, are subject to FOIA. There's just a ton of areas where teachers and staff can be more transparent with parents, partner with them. And as these cases come up and individuals have problems, they can work together on them. for the best interest of the student. Everyone knows that it's the best.
Do you feel like supporters of these policy changes are downplaying the real world consequences of these policy changes?
I think we're in for a world of trouble up ahead with the generation that's graduating and going through school now. We have no idea what they've gone through already with COVID, with the mental health issues that we're facing today, and the depression we're facing. I worry about what's coming, and I don't think that policy is enough will be enough to address.
Do you think, generally speaking, you think about how K through 12 education is doing right now in the state of Michigan, and what do you think, like the broader agenda, of these schools? How do you feel these changes? What do they reveal, in your view, about Michigan's educational system, and how is Michigan's educational system in total faring, compared to other states?
Terrible. I mean, we're doing terrible. Our scores continue to, hover around terrible if they don't go down. NAEP scores, reading, math, literacy. We have not rebounded from the pandemic. We have not put the investments in literacy that we need to, the targeted investments. And at the same time, we have all this distraction about these cultural issues going on, and, teachers and staff spending more time on, political or ideological, classroom ideas. They're not teaching math and reading, and we're having kids leave the state. We're having families leave the state because they know that.
Yeah, I left a former state primarily because of the educational system and came to the great state of Michigan. And now we're thinking, well, thank God that our kids are already through K through 12 now. We have to go through this again because they have gone down the tubes. They are the state of Michigan, the educational system here is now far worse than the educational system in California, which I left about 11 and a half years ago. That's how quickly this fall, the state of Michigan has occurred. And I hope it stops. I hope there is a way to reverse this trend, but I think it's going to have to start with parents being really aware of what's happening in their schools and at the state level and the legislature and the various, office holders, including the governor as well. So I'm very grateful you're writing about this and you're bringing it out because I do think I'm one of those who believe this is incredibly important to continue to discuss. So always good to have you and to talk with you. Caitlin Buss is assistant editorial page editor at the Detroit News. Go to detroitnews.com and look for Caitlin Buss. Good stuff as always. Caitlin, thank you. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks. Bye-bye.
All right, take care. Have a good day. Yeah, this is super important. I think here's the reason why they're getting away with this is because parents aren't aware of what's really happening, and they do downplay this. They act like if we speak about this, we're somehow again spreading disinformation while we're actually acknowledging laws that have been passed sometimes in the dark of night without full reading of these various bills that are being voted on, or the Democrats not allowing Republicans to actually read through these bills because they get them maybe an hour ahead of time, and there's sometimes thousands of pages they have to go through. It's very sneaky the way they're doing this. And the politicians that I have spoken to, they always, ahead of time, if you put it in front of them, what these various, like we spoke about the midterms in 2022, in this various proposals that they were supporting, claiming they were going to do something which was actually the opposite of what the reading and the language and the verbiage of these various bills or these initiatives that people are going to vote on would say. And you would bring that to, front and center, and they would deny it flat out. That's just disinformation. This word disinformation and misinformation is not only overused, it's completely deceptive. And it's meant to deceive. So you don't find out what you're really voting on until it's too late. And unfortunately, the amendment of the Constitution in the state of Michigan in three major ways it's too late because it's incredibly difficult to amend the Constitution. And they had to do it through deceit and lies and in collusion with the news media in the state of Michigan. It's pretty horrible what's happened, but they'll never cop to it. They'll never admit to it. Speaking of that, I want to talk about Lindsey Graham. On speaking to the media, who is actively opposed to all things Lindsey Graham and maybe other conservatives would stand for. So Lindsey Graham had some pretty sharp words for Republicans who are backing Kamala Harris in the 2024 presidential race. Take a look.
It was Joe Biden who got us out of Afghanistan that led to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. It was Kamala Harris, the border czar, that opened up our border to 10 million illegal immigrants running wild, women getting raped and killed, terrorists residing in our backyard. It was their decision to stop energy production, making us more energy independent. It was their decision to abandon Israel at their time of need when it came to weapons.
Senator, the U.S. is making more energy than
So, no,
at
I
any
think
point.
these generals are wrong.
But they worked for Donald Trump.
You know what? I know,
they worked for former President Trump. These are former Trump administration
To every Republican
officials.
supporting her, what the hell are you doing? You're supporting the most radical nominee in the history of American politics. The Green New Deal, Medicare for all. She was the last person in the room before Biden decided to withdraw from Afghanistan. She was the border czar. She cast the tie-breaking vote for the Inflation Reduction Act that gives you high prices. What are you doing? You're trying to convince me that Donald Trump's rhetoric is the danger to this country. The danger to this country is the policies of Biden and Harris. Her fingerprints are all over this disaster, and I can't take 4 more years of this crap.
All right.
When you support her, you're supporting 4 more years of garbage policy.
Senator, we got a lot more to get through, so let me keep moving. I want to ask you about
what the hell are you doing as a Republican blessing this stuff?
Yeah, good for him. And I know Kristen Welker desperately wanted to cut him off. And you see her trying to jump in there multiple times saying, but these are Trump's people. These are, it's like the same old kind of rhetoric. And the news media is very untrustworthy. So she quickly wanted to pivot to some other very important issues we have to get to because, well, I don't like what you're saying, Lindsey Graham. So that was Meet the Press. And the South Carolina, as you saw, the senator didn't mince words. What the hell are you doing speaking to Republicans who are trying to vote for Kamala Harris? It's completely antithetical to any conservative values. And Christians the same way. Some Christians who are saying, I cannot vote for Donald Trump because of my Christian beliefs, so I'm going to vote for Kamala Harris. Do you think that she is actually more moral than Donald Trump? She just hides it better. Donald Trump wears his life pretty much on his sleeves. He says things about, what's in his head. He lets them out what he truly believes. Kamala Harris doesn't do that. She pretends she's somebody she is not. So that's that. I mean, at least Donald Trump wears it on his sleeve, but his policies and the idea that people say, oh, they're just policies, but how can you vote for the guy? Yeah, the guy is very flawed, obviously. He's a horrible communicator, and he's done some crass things in his life, but so is Kamala Harris, so was Joe Biden, but they have covered it up. So just total disbelief from Lindsey Graham at the GOP members throwing their support behind a radical, far left, yes, Marxist ideologue named Kamala Harris. Why would they vote for her when she wants to undo everything that you say that you support? And Lindsey Graham, he was emphasizing that Kamala Harris, as Biden's partner, he holds direct responsibility for all of those administration's failures. In fact, she probably believes that Joe Biden didn't go far enough. And he points to these policies like Medicare for all, which the media says, no, that's not true. The Green New Deal, the media says, no, that's not true. All of this is true. She's been very vocal about her support for these things. Her leadership role, yes, as the border czar during a surge of illegal immigration. And there are leftists who refuse to acknowledge the millions of illegal immigrants who have come across the country. I saw one yesterday saying none of that is true. There are more illegal immigrants coming across our border under the Donald Trump administration. And then you show them the facts and the numbers, and they say, where'd you get that from, Fox News? No, you get it from the government itself, the Joe Biden administration. This is what is clear as day, and you're refusing to not believe this. What is it in your mind that causes you to do that? I think it's darkness and this refusal to come to the light. So how Christians can vote for that is beyond me. Think about the Afghanistan withdrawal and what that led to in casting the deciding vote on the Inflation Reduction Act, which actually, it actually increased inflation. And that wasn't about inflation anyway, in terms of reducing it. It was about giving hundreds of billions of dollars to renewable energy companies because the government wanted to fast track this transition to renewable energies. And they didn't, and they knew it was going to have an economic impact that would be negative. But again, they were covering that up. So you're trying to convince me that Trump's rhetoric is the real danger? I love how he said that. No, the danger is the disastrous Biden-Harris policies. Lindsey Graham was correct. That backing Harris means 4 more years of bad decisions. And he says, I can't take that. And unfortunately, we may be forced to take that. This is this unprecedented shift towards radicalism. And the concern that Graham has, he's highlighting a clear ideological shift. Kamala Harris is not just not a moderate vice president at all, but she is the figurehead for policies that are radical, can never be implemented without destroying this country. And just the Green New Deal itself, I think would have cost like, what, $70 trillion? $70 trillion to implement that? Yeah, nobody can afford that. I don't even know if the world has that kind of money. I mean, our national, I think, annual budget was like maybe $7 trillion, which is incredibly high now for the United States. So it's, pie in the sky, wanting people to feel good about saving the planet when it is impossible to implement those policies without hurting you and without hurting me. Let's talk about voter rolls now. Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin is pushing back hard against the Department of Justice, calling out a new lawsuit that targets the state's efforts to clean up voter rolls. The Department of Justice, they're arguing that Virginia violated federal law when it enforced Youngkin's executive order to remove people from voter rolls that are not verified or legal voters. And they can't verify that they're even citizens of this country. The United States government, the federal government, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris' Department of Justice wants them to stay on those voter rolls until after the election. Can't do it before the election. But Youngkin, thankfully, is insisting that the process is very transparent, it's legal, and it's based on self-identification through the Department of Motor Vehicles. So they've got the data, they got the receipts. So he did this interview, Glenn Youngkin did, yesterday, and he said the procedure has bipartisan roots, noting that Democrat Tim Kaine is the one who initially signed this into law back in 2006. Boy, has the Democratic Party changed. And I thought Tim Kaine was a radical back then. But no, at least he supported this. You can't vote unless you're a U.S. citizen or you can identify yourself. So Glenn Youngkin explained that when a DMV customer declares that they are not a citizen of this country, but that same individual who identified themselves as not a U.S. citizen ends up on the voter rolls, well, they do get 2 weeks to prove that they are, in fact, a citizen. And if they can't, they are removed. But they still can cast a provisional ballot on Election Day. Provisional meaning that if you still can prove that you're a citizen, then we'll count your vote, which I still disagree with. But that's what Glenn Youngkin says this is doing. The Department of Justice doesn't even like that. So the DOJ filing this lawsuit less than a month before the election, and Youngkin expressed skepticism about the timing of this, questioning the department's motives, given that the law had operated without issue for 18 years under both parties. What's going on now that there is a now radical progressive left in control? Election integrity, or is this overreach? What do you think? I mean, I'd like to take your comments here in a bit as well. Put them in the comment section. We'll get to them in just a moment after a couple of these headlines here. The lawsuit, to me, feels like federal overreach, undoubtedly. Targeting a common sense policy that simply ensures that only eligible citizens are on the voter rolls. Something previous Democratic administrations never objected to. And it's a weaponization of the Department of Justice. The timing, raising a lot of eyebrows. Why is the DOJ stepping in now, just weeks before this election, when the policy has been in place under both Republican and Democratic governors in the state of Virginia? It suggests an agenda-driven use of federal power. Safeguards. Why don't they matter to the Department of Justice? Youngkin's explanation is highlighting that this isn't a reckless purge, but an individualized process with multiple safeguards in place, including same-day registration and provisional ballots to make sure we got this right, protecting legal voters while maintaining clean voter rolls. All right, that's Virginia. Let's go to Michigan now because Elon Musk is pushing back against her. Michigan Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson, who had accused Elon Musk of spreading misinformation after he asked a question regarding election integrity. So here's what happened late last week. Elon Musk asked on X, formerly Twitter, this question. Michigans have more registered voters than there are eligible citizens. Is that true? And the answer to that question is yes. We know that's true. It's fact. It's in the data. Well, Jocelyn Benson posted on her account in response to Elon Musk that Elon Musk is spreading dangerous disinformation. Dangerous. And when I saw that, I responded to Michigan Secretary of State with this question. Why is it dangerous to ask the question? And then I give an answer because you know the real answer. The state currently has 8.4 million registered voters. And that was obtained by Bridge, Michigan, by the way, this kind of a liberal outlet. They know this is the case. Nearly 500,000 people, more than the number of people in the state who are old enough to vote. You have 500,000, more than that, registered voters than there are actual people in the state who are old enough to vote. 500,000 more. So even Bridge, Michigan, is the name of the publication. A pretty good online news publication, but with the liberal bent for sure. But they even pointed out the obvious. There are 8.4 million registered voters in Michigan, and only 7.9 million people are even old enough to vote in the state. So here's how Elon Musk responded to Jocelyn Benson's claim that what he was saying was dangerous disinformation. He said this, Jocelyn Michelle Benson, shame on you for blatantly lying to the public. You only plan to remove the ineligible voters after this election. And that necessarily means, this is me now talking, that there are far more people registered to vote than there are eligible voters. Jocelyn Benson called it disinformation because she claims the fact that many of them will be removed by the year 2027. And so that somehow means it's not an issue today. Elon Musk, you're spreading disinformation because by 2027, we're going to get rid of all of them. Well, it's 2024 right now, and none of them will probably be removed prior to this upcoming presidential election in about, 2 weeks. And she's cool with that. No issue whatsoever. It's dangerous to point that out, is what she's saying. That's when you hear the word disinformation or misinformation, don't buy it because it is true that she is, at the very best, highly deceiving or highly mischaracterizing the truth about how many ineligible voters are active right now in the state of Michigan. Michigan's voter rolls are facing this kind of scrutiny. Good. They should. This is new data that came out. This is a significant mismatch between the number of registered voters and the state's voting age population. Again, 8.4 million registered voters, nearly 500,000 more than eligible adults. Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson dismissed concerns about this. She argues that addressing these disparities is an attempt to cause people to question the process. What's wrong with that? Why shouldn't we question the process? Or Jocelyn Benson, should we just accept willy-nilly whatever it is you say? To her, that she would say, yes, we are the authority. Don't trust anybody else except for me. So the Republican National Committee is not buying this, thankfully, and they're filing a lawsuit. They filed it in February that claims Michigan's bloated voter lists create opportunities for fraud. That claim is accurate. They highlight how previous lawsuits forced Jocelyn Benson to clean up similar issues back in 2020. It wasn't enough. But now the problem seems to have only gotten worse under her watch. 53 counties in Michigan are reporting that there are more registered voters than there are eligible residents. 53 counties. And Benson, who many believe is preparing for her 2026 gubernatorial run, again prior to the 2027 cleanup of the voter rolls, she insists that these inactive voters will be removed. Oh yeah, but it's not going to happen until 2027, after I win the gubernatorial election, hopefully. So eroding trust in democracy. So failing to maintain accurate voter rolls weakens public confidence in these elections. The inflated registration lists create this perception that our elections are not secure. It opens the door to questions about the legitimacy of results. It's not because we're pointing it out, it's because it is true what we are pointing out, and then she denies it, which further, in my view, erodes trust in the election process and further erodes trust in her specifically. And there's this lax oversight versus, I think, political motives. Obviously, Jocelyn Benson's reluctance to promptly address the registration imbalance suggests an attempt to preserve voter outreach networks. So couple that with a Democratic push to loosen these election rules to make it easier for anybody to vote. That is what fuels suspicion that the state's leadership is prioritizing political strategy over electoral integrity. Absentee ballots and these fraud risks. Let's look at that. The history of absentee ballot issues in Detroit, the biggest city in Michigan, raises a whole lot of very serious concerns. If voter rolls remain bloated, which they are, the risk of fraud through absentee ballots, particularly involving residents who no longer even live in the state. They don't live here, but they're still being allowed to vote. That becomes a troubling reality. And there's a guy named Mark Brewer, who is a far-left Democratic activist, who says not allowing people who don't live in the state of Michigan, not allowing them to vote in the state of Michigan is another vote of like election, what's the word he used? I forget, but basically you're disenfranchising voters. They're not allowed to vote. By the way, Jocelyn Benson and the state's far-left Attorney General, Dana Nessel, they have worked with the news media in Michigan to help identify people who spread this disinformation. Are you aware of that? And she asked the media to help her combat it and to make sure that the only source of reliable information comes from the government, namely her office. And much of the media in the state of Michigan, as they do around the country, seem to oblige to those requests. All right. Love to take your comments and any questions that you might have here on Tom Jordan Live. I don't know if Cameron, we have a few that we can pop up here. Love to take them. We got Annie. We have to protect the health and the safety of our female athletes. Yes, we do. And I'm glad to note, Annie, it's a great comment, that most people would agree with you. The numbers are staggering. The number of parents and just common sense individuals far outnumbers the number of people who support this far left radical ideology to allow biological men into female locker rooms and to compete in female sports. Most people do not support this. So you ask yourself, how then does this become legal? How does it become law? Because of a huge amount of real, true disinformation and manipulation by both the government in partnership and in collusion with the news media. They're the ones doing this. They're the ones refusing to acknowledge the real issues that are occurring, the real harm that happens to girls when they're standing there in a locker room and they're seeing a guy change in front of them, if that's not shocking enough. And it's not just, by the way, in these schools and sports. You're seeing it at these various gyms around the country that are allowing men, so long as they say they feel like they're a woman, to go into the women's locker rooms in these public gymnasiums. You know, Planet Fitness has a policy that they're allowed to do that. And people have come out and said, listen, there's a guy there with his junk being exposed right in my face, and I can't stand that. I don't want to see that. And that person who's complaining gets kicked out, and the membership gets expunged because we don't judge here at Planet Fitness. Well, maybe you ought to, because that's actually damaging to, you talk about psychological welfare of individuals. That hurts people and is something they can't unsee years after that. And that's just scratching the surface. There's other threats of that as well. But we talk about that aspect of this whole thing that most individuals don't support, allowing men into girls' sports. But it's the fairness of competition aspect of it as well. And we played a video earlier of men lifting weights in these weight competitions with women who identify in their own head as a female, and that somehow allows them to lift weights and compete against women. And there's obviously all the other. Boxing is another one that was really, pronounced in the Olympic Games in Paris, France. Men beating the snot out of women And they say it's out of equity and justice, and it's out of compassion to let these men who do have some serious issues to beat the snot out of women by boxing against them and knocking them out. It's sick that we're allowing this society. All right, any other comments, Cameron? All right, Andy, thanks so much. We'll get to more than just chime in here for you. We're going to get to a final thought here. Then I'll take more of your questions and your comments as they come through. There is a movement, and I really have wanted to address this for a while, among Christian evangelicals, a claim that the right thing to do, what Jesus would do, would be to vote for abortion-supporting, Second Amendment abolishing, traditional family values antagonist, and Marxist ideologue Kamala Harris. That they say is what Jesus would do. And it's coming only from this deep hatred for Donald Trump, not because Kamala Harris holds any biblically strong values. She doesn't. Many of you probably saw the video of her shouting down these protesters at her rally saying, Jesus is Lord. And she said, you guys are the wrong rally. And meantime, you pan over to a Donald Trump rally where they're singing hallelujah and praising Jesus. And I'm not saying, keep in mind, I have to repeat this, I'm not saying Donald Trump is a perfect individual, but if you are a Christian, would you rather have policies that protect your right to practice your religion as you believe is biblically sound and a right way to worship God without government interference? Why wouldn't you vote for that particular candidate? Even if you don't like his mouth, because they all have foul mouths. Kamala Harris is not pure, nor is Joe Biden, nor is Gretchen Whitmer. They have foul mouths, nor is Mallory McMorrow, who openly cusses on Twitter, pretending that she is more righteous than these other Republicans. It's astounding to me. So there's a guy named Ray Ortlund. He's a pastor and is a founder of Emmanuel Church in Nashville, Tennessee. And he sparked this theological debate by endorsing Kamala Harris for president while invoking the name of Jesus. So Ortlund, he's part of the evangelical Never Trump faction, claimed that following Christ means rejecting Trump and instead supporting Kamala Harris in the upcoming election. David French, another guy, he's made similar arguments in the New York Times. That's why the far-left atheist publications love these guys. It's like weaponized theology. Ortlund and French's manipulation of Christian teachings to endorse Harris that's what's dangerous. It's a dangerous precedent. Jesus' teachings are about love and truth, yes, not political machinations aimed at endorsing abortion or radical policies. Abortion is not kind. Neither is transgender surgery for minors that will psychologically damage them in addition to the physical damage for life, irreversibly. That's not kind and loving, and that's not what Jesus would do. So you got to look at this, policy versus character argument when you're looking at candidates. Voting for Kamala Harris based on personal distaste for Donald Trump overlooks the deadly consequences of her policies. Kamala Harris represents an administration that openly supports abortion and restricts religious freedom. Why would you want that if you're a Christian? These are issues that should concern any Christian voter. There's this moral inversion that is happening here. The idea that Kamala Harris, who advocates for late-term abortions and erases gender distinctions, could be the Christian candidate is morally inverted. It is a gross misreading of both Scripture and the political landscape. I mean, there are real consequences here. A Kamala Harris presidency would perpetuate policies that undermine family values, threaten national security, expand government overreach. Christian voters should be discerning enough to understand that policies have real-world consequences that extend far beyond personal character flaws. Kamala Harris believes it's acceptable to tell children who are made in the image of God that they were born in the wrong body and that undergoing irreversible procedures will bring them happiness. We know it's not true, and we spoke about this more at length last week, but there are case studies around the world that show that the opposite is true, that as children get these irreversible procedures, it exacerbates their issues, their anxiety, their depression, and their happiness. This often involves, the way they do it, pressuring parents with threats of suicide. Like if you don't get them into a different body quick, they're going to kill themselves, or even concealing children's transgender issues from them, which is happening now in states like Michigan and Minnesota. And it's a practice now seen in her home state. Kamala Harris, California, does it. So think about that. California hides these procedures from parents. Minnesota actually allows parents to be kicked out of their children's lives if they don't support these policies. You got Tim Walz, the current vice presidential candidate, is the governor of Minnesota, and Kamala Harris was the attorney general in cahoots with the governor of California, Gavin Newsom. They all support this, and it's anti-Christian. So, shockingly, just days after, a transgender shooter took the lives of 6 Christians, remember that, Nashville, Tennessee, the same town that this guy Ortlin is a pastor in. By the way, it included children that were killed, 6 Christians at that Nashville school. Kamala Harris tweeted her support saying, "We see you and will never stop fighting for you," in celebration of trans and non-binary Americans, not for the Christians who were killed, but for the shooter who killed those Christians. So the Bible calls for wisdom in these leadership choices, and wisdom dictates voting for the candidate whose policies protect life and liberty. Supporting Kamala Harris under the guise of Christianity ignores the grave moral issues at stake in this election. Thankfully, there are Christians out there, and there are more courageous pastors who are pushing back against this narrative. But I'll tell you, as a Christian myself and as a pastor myself, I know other pastors, I know other churches who are allowing this ideology to seep in, and they actually have services now, and they promote books that say, listen, we're fine however you vote. If you believe that the far left will handle abortion the way you see more biblically fit, we support you doing that. If you think it's the Republican side, we support you on that. We don't take a position on these issues whatsoever. Are you kidding me? How can you do that? As someone who has supposedly a biblical worldview, the Bible teaches against all of these things, and has many examples of actively engaging in what you would call the political process, dealing with moral and ethical and biblical issues. All right, I have another comment. Let's bring that up here on the screen. It is Patrick Gonkzar. I hope I said that right, Patrick. These dereliction of cleaning up voter rolls has all the look of a slow-motion coup disguised as an election. Patrick, that is so on point. If it happens slowly enough, you just might not notice how we're taking over the country, how we are the ones actually overthrowing the United States of America. And you notice the little tidbit narratives that they throw in here, like, dismantling the institutions of this country, getting rid of the Constitution because we think that's wrong, or getting rid of the 3 branches of government. Hey, why do we allow non-citizens to vote in this election? That seems more like the fair and equitable thing to do. Why are you opposed to that? What are you, a nationalist type of thing? That's dangerous. We want more globalism. Let's get rid of borders. This is the slow progress. Remember, progressivism means progress towards dismantling the current foundations of the United States of America. That is the truth. That is what the original progressives wanted to do back in the early 20th century and the late 19th century. This is when it started, and it really began to ramp up over the past several decades. It's been a long, slow-moving coup since before the days of Woodrow Wilson. Even Teddy Roosevelt had some of this kind of ideology percolating, in his mindset a little bit. Let's get the government more involved in people's lives, because we do think that we know a little bit more about what's best for them. And on top of that, it makes running a government a whole lot more efficient if we just strip away some of these rights from these citizens in this country. Things like property rights, let's get rid of those. Yes, that's what Woodrow Wilson believed, to make the government more efficient, and also making the legislature stronger than the other 3 branches of government by developing the bureaucratic state. It's all out there. You can read it. It's not made up. This is true. It's a slow, how'd you put it? A slow motion coup. Patrick, I really appreciate that comment. That's wisdom right there. Appreciate it. Again, the best way to support us is not to give us money. You can do that too. You can go to Patreon if you'd like to support us. $2.50 a month, $5 a month. That helps us out in a big way as well. But even bigger than that, if you just watch these podcasts on YouTube, on X, on Facebook, on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, just watch it. Let it play out to the end and share it. That's a big help for us. We want to spread the news at Tom Jordan Live. And if you have questions, you can always email us as well. Go to tomjordanlive.com as part of the Wayne Radio group, and proud to be the flagship program for Wayne Radio. Appreciate it so much. We got a great show coming up again tomorrow, as always. Tom Jordan, have a great day. God bless you.